running, and myself from civil engineering. We're running the seminar this fall, and today we have a special guest from City of Portland, from the Active Transportation Group, Steve Hoyt-McBeth, and he will be talking. He knows a lot about bike sharing, so he will be talking about what's going to happen with bike sharing in the City of Portland. So just remember, at the end, we'll take questions, and the only thing is there is just one microphone, and for people online to understand the questions, you need to use the microphone. So at the end, just raise your hand, and we'll just wait until we give you the mic. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, Miguel. I think I'm live here.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks, everybody, for being here on a rainy day. I imagine that we have a broad range of knowledge about bike share. Some folks pretty new to bike share, and some people have probably ridden systems in different cities and are pretty familiar. So I'm going to try to hopefully capture a swath that interests all of you. So I'm going to go over the history of bike share quickly, what it is, who's using it, why Portland's doing it, and then talk a little bit about the Portland Bike Share project that we'll be rolling out in 2013. So I wanted to start with a definition of bike share. There's a couple out there that I wanted to highlight. One is by Paul DeMaio, who is with a consulting company in Washington, D.C., who's been following bike share since the 90s. And he has a very nice, succinct definition: public bikes available for short-term rental at unattended, i.e. self-service, locations. So recently, the Federal Highway Administration gave some funding to the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, and they came up with a great report, and they kind of created a definition that a highway engineer could appreciate. So this one is a non-motorized transportation service, typically structured to provide users point-to-point transportation for short-distance trips. And the one thing I'd key into here, these are usually short trips, both in terms of distance and in terms of time. And I like this kind of transportation service piece, which really kind of gives a sense that this is really kind of like public transit on bikes. It's really, don't think of it like a bike rental service. I would encourage you to think about it as a transit service. What bike sharing is not is storefront bike rental. We have a number of great services within the city of Portland right now. And it's not, I would suggest, long-term bike rental. A lot of universities have created these systems for their students and staff that allow them to rent a bike for a quarter. They're great services. It's just not really what bike share is. So let me try to handle the history of bike share in one slide. So the first generation of bike share is kind of like these free bike programs. The first one was in Amsterdam in 1965. It's really not a bike share program. It's more kind of like political protest or performance art, where some activists put out about 10 or 50, depending on who you talk to, white bikes that were just essentially used bikes, put them out on the street, and then just left them there to be used. And they pretty quickly went away. La Rochelle in France had the yellow bike program in 1974, which is considered one of the first kind of popular systems. Then Cambridge had the green bikes. You kind of notice a theme developing here on naming the programs. In 1993, that also put out free bikes that kind of went away very quickly. And then Portland took us about 30 years to reach Amsterdam. Had the yellow bike program that was run by activists, and eventually the Community Cycling Center got involved, providing used bikes, all painted yellow, that were all around the city. And did anyone here ever ride a yellow bike? No? Even Chris, I thought you would maybe be able to do it. OK. So anyway, that's generation one. Generation two takes us to Copenhagen. And they kind of decided that one of the things that you could do is actually have a singular design so that you couldn't actually take this bike to a chop shop and resell the parts. So this bike, like these were singular pieces that worked only with their bike. They also have this little coin operated thing on here where you put a coin in, and that released the bike, and you could use it, and when you were done, you got your coin back. This system is still, actually, I think they did just close the system now. Helsinki had a similar system. They'd never really kind of reached critical mass, and it's kind of hard to know if it was just because Copenhagen everybody was biking, or if it's just kind of the system. Third generation is kind of what most people consider we have now. Lyon was, I think, the first city that made a big splash with this, and Paris is the one probably best known for this. These are systems that usually you have to have a credit card to use and a membership. There's a more sophisticated locking system. They're more widespread throughout the city, and oftentimes there's a private partner, either an advertising agency or corporate sponsors, that are underwriting a lot of the cost of these systems. Some people say there's a fourth generation, which was created by Public Bike System in Montreal. And the big innovation here is that the bike station itself sits on a metal plate that is portable. Essentially, in the wintertime, or if you ever need to move the system, you can just kind of take a boom truck and move the system. So that's kind of, some people say that would be fourth generation. So bike share really kind of, in its latest iteration, kind of came to the US in 2008. Washington, D.C. opened a small system with about 120 bikes in 2008. And then in the Democratic and National Republican conventions in 2008, there were bike sharing demonstrations both in Denver and Minneapolis. And those kind of took on. And Denver and Minneapolis both opened systems in 2010 of a pretty decent scale. And I've kind of broken these down by the number of bikes. The large systems here, and you can kind of see there's 5 kind of big ones right now, a number of small systems, kind of medium systems in the kind of like 100 to 350 range, and then kind of what I would kind of call more curiosities and really a bike share system where they have just a few bikes, so hopefully those will grow. And then we'll see, you can see coming online are some very big systems in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and of course us here in little old Portland. So you can see in a very short amount of time, bike sharing has really exploded, and in some places you wouldn't necessarily think of in terms of being bike cities. So that's very exciting for us. So how does bike share work? Bike share stations are placed throughout a city, usually kind of in a concentration where you have high densities. This is a map from the Denver B-Cycle system of their bikes, and these are what the bikes look like. Bike share is a membership-based service. To access the bikes, you either have to become a member, either a monthly, annual, or weekly member, or you can also just buy a day pass. So that gets you access to the system. And then after that, almost with every system, the first half hour of that trip is at no additional cost. Now, you can bring that bike back to any station. It can be a one-way trip. It doesn't have to come back to the station you took it at. And then grab a new bike and start all over again. The clock starts again at 0. But the cost after that first half hour, usually this is from the Houston B-Cycle system, after that first half hour, the cost goes up very quickly. And the intent is that these bikes are meant for short trips. When you're not using that bike, you're supposed to bring it back to the station so then it's available to somebody else to use. And that really allows the number of bikes to be leveraged and be available to a lot more people. So this is the B-Cycle station. This is the public bike system station run by Alta Bike Share. If you're a day member, if you just want to use it for the first time, you can go up to the system, enter your credit card there. You'll punch in your information. Of course, you have to kind of waive that you'll never sue the bike sharing system. And then it gives you a bike. You get on a bike, and off you go. Now, if you're a member, an annual member or a monthly member, you'll get either a fob key or a card. With a fob key, you don't have to wait in line with the masses. You just go right up to the bike and put your membership fob key right in there and grab a bike. You're ready to go. With the B-Cycle system, you put your membership card and do the same thing. And then off you go. And then you bring your bike back, and you're good to go. Both of these systems have locks that are on the system in case you need to make a quick stop somewhere. But you're really kind of discouraged from doing that because, 1, the meter's running the whole time you're doing that. And 2, if you do that, the bike's then not available to somebody else. So let's talk about Portland quickly on bike share. So as I mentioned, in 1994, we had the yellow bike system that lasted about a year. Community Cycling Center eventually replaced this program with their Create a Commuter program, which, as opposed to having kind of random bikes around for anybody to use, actually provided a systematic program for low-income folks to have training in bike mechanics and actually get a bike when they were done with the system to be able to own that bike. In 2007, we were the first city to put out a request for proposal for a bike share system. We kind of got a little bit ahead of the curve there. When we got the proposals back, what we saw was really that the U.S. bike share system was not only far from maturity, but really wasn't ready for prime time, and we decided to shelve things for a little bit. In 2009, we held a bike sharing demonstration and invited all bike share companies to come. We had both B-Cycle and Public Bike System come to that, along with a couple of, I would say, pre-startups from the Northwest. We had it at Sunday Parkways and downtown. And then this spring, we released our RFP, and we went through a process and had several applicants to that process, and we selected Alta Bicycle Share to run that system. Alta is based in Portland and is running systems right now in Chattanooga, Chattanooga, Boston, and Washington, D.C., Arlington, and all of those big cities that I talked that were kind of like coming soon, New York, Los Angeles, Vancouver, BC, San Francisco Bay Area, those are all also going to be run by Alta. Alta also has a partner, Portland Bike Share, Inc., which includes a lot of transportation and financing folks, including Chris Smith, who's in the audience right now, who will be handling the financing part of this. One of the things that I didn't really say a lot about, but sponsorship's a really important part of kind of making bike share pencil out. It will certainly be the case for Portland. We're putting $2 million of federal money towards bike share, and we anticipate a lot more money needing to be raised through sponsorship from private entities. So why bike share in Portland? Now, I don't get these questions very much, but when we first started bringing this out when we did the public demonstration in 2009, we got a couple questions. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. So why bike share in Portland? First of all, we have some policy goals that are really pushing us to very quickly increase the number of people biking in Portland. The bike plan for 2030 and both the climate action plan say that in the next, what are we now? I guess that's 13 years from now, that 25% of trips and 25% of commute trips will be made by bicycle. The Portland plan has this concept of a 20-minute neighborhood where all neighborhoods ideally will have all of the services that you need within a 20-minute walking or biking or transit district distance. So biking needs to be a very important part of that. And bike share actually is a pretty low-cost alternative to owning a bicycle. Annual bike share memberships usually run between $50 and $80. That provides you access to that bike for the entire year. As I said, the first half hour of every trip is free. You don't have to maintain the bike. You don't have to store the bike. The bike's always ready to go. And then we get to leverage our great transit system that we already have here. There's a lot of talk in kind of transportation circles about that last mile or quarter mile, about if transit is isn't right near where you need to be or where you're starting, bike share is a way to kind of close that gap. And what we've seen, actually, now that bike share's had a little bit of time to get some legs in the United States, is that it's proving very popular when you have a large system that actually provides some scale. Washington, D.C. broke 1 million trips in their first year, and they hit almost 2 million trips in their second year. Minneapolis in their second year, which is, I'd say, Minneapolis and Denver are kind of more analogous to us in terms of land use intensities, size, and market. Both had 200,000 trips in their second year. Miami Beach, not necessarily the place you think of for biking. 750,000 trips, and Boston in the first 4 months had 250,000 of trips. So we're really seeing a scale here of really bringing new people to bicycling and a whole lot of bikes. So, okay, this is the rhetorical question I was saying before. Do we need bike share? This is a question we used to get a lot. Like, doesn't everybody already own a bike? And isn't everybody who's going to bike biking? Okay, so let me just take this first one first. So doesn't everybody own a bike? So we do surveys a lot asking people about their bicycling and if they own a bike. We get about 65 to 70% of people saying, yes, I own a bike. So okay, so we know 60 to 75% of people own a bike. Does anyone know what, in our latest American Community Survey, what our bike commute mode split was? 6. Thank you, Chris. It was 6. Okay, so just because you own a bike doesn't mean you're actually using that bike. So the fact that just people own a bike doesn't mean that bike share isn't there. The flip side of that is that both the community cycling centers study about reducing barriers to bicycling, and the national studies have found that access to a bike actually is the #1 barrier for people bicycling. So providing a bike in an area for people can also help that. And in terms of isn't everybody already biking that's going to, our numbers have continued to grow. They grew this year. We'll see our Portland Bicycle Count report. We'll also see if we see numbers. We see people growing, and bike share is a pretty specific service that makes biking a lot more convenient, because if anybody biked when they left home this morning, they had to make a couple decisions. Okay, do I need to bring my raincoat? Am I willing to bike in the rain? What meetings do I have? What do I need to bring and all that? Well, bike share, you just walk up to the bike and you go. So let's also look at kind of some other cities that have done bike share. I'm going to show a lot of very poorly designed graphs that talk about annual membership surveys from Denver, Minneapolis, and Washington, D.C. So these are surveys of annual members. So they're somewhere between, with D.C. and, with Minneapolis and Denver, this is about, in their first year, they had about 1,000 to 2,000 members. So the question, do you own a bike or have access to a bike? Very high percentages of bike ownership. So obviously, we can still help people with biking more, even if they own a bike with bike share. And then this is, I think, even more compelling to us. So both Denver and Minneapolis asked, since joining bike share, Have you, has the amount that you're biking stayed the same, increased, or decreased? And we see in both Denver and Minneapolis very significant increases in the number of people who become bike share members biking. And then even more exciting, you can tell I'm getting really frothy about this, is the shift in drive alone trips. So both Denver and Minneapolis, the questions were a little bit different between these three cities. DC asked, how did you used to get around for your bike share trip? So this is not this is not a one-to-one trip replacement rate. So you could answer many different things, and so I didn't even add something here. But for Denver and Minneapolis, the question was, think about your last bike share trip. How would you have made that trip if bike share wasn't around? So as you can see, like very significant amounts of shifting to drive alone and other like car share, taxi, motorized trips. So when we look at our numbers in the work that we do, we would be ecstatic to have this sorts of change. And then I'll say something else. So this is some old data, but I just want to, we don't record this data the same way, so it proves a point. So this is the city auditor every year sends out a survey to citizens to ask them a number of questions about their feelings about the city of Portland. We also throw in a couple questions about how you get to work. So this is from 2008, and we asked, like, this shows the number of people who identified the bicycle as their primary commute vehicle. And then we don't ask this question anymore, unfortunately. I wish we still did. And then we ask them what their secondary vehicle is. And then we can see that a lot more people said that bicycling was their secondary vehicle. So right there, that 10% between 8 and 18 is a great market for bike share, because these are people who are already interested in biking, but for whatever reason, sometimes aren't biking. And so if we create a convenient option for them, we're hoping we can get them. So this is kind of, this is an idea that Roger Geller came up with that had kind of reached mythic proportions, and thankfully Professor Jennifer Dill has kind of grounded this in actual survey data. But this is how we kind of like tried to think about where we're going with the city of Portland and biking and how we're going to grab people. And we're thinking, who's our market? So how many people are familiar with this thing before I like talk about it for too long? OK, everyone gets it. This is the big daddy right here. This is the interest concern, somewhere between 60–65% of Portlanders who are interested in bicycling, but for whatever reason aren't doing it. Whether it's convenience, whether it's concern about biking with cars, whatever. They're not doing it. If we want to reach our goals, we need to bring some of these people over into giving bicycling a try. So Denver Bike Sharing actually asked their members to identify themselves based on these three things. This talks a little bit about kind of the penetration of this idea of that graph. So 15% said they're strong and fearless. Most people said they're enthused and confident. But we got almost a quarter of these members were from the interested but concerned category. So that right there is very encouraging to us that bike share has the ability to kind of bring some of these people over. This is another interesting thing that the Denver Bike Share survey asked, was they asked people, have you, I think I actually put this question here, have you influenced other people or got other people to try B-Cycle, which is the name of their system? Basically, have you been an ambassador, have you been a recruiter for bicycling or bike sharing? Very, very high numbers of these people actually have been kind of get religion about bike share and actually then get someone else to do that. You would imagine that some of these people that they get are people who are probably on the fence and not biking already. And then there's this idea I think is very compelling about bike share is the convenience of bike share. And Nice Ride Minnesota, which is the bike share system in Minneapolis, asked their members to tell them what they liked most about bike share. By a this is number 2, by a very, very wide margin, people said the convenience of using bike share is what they liked the most about it. So convenience, I think, is something that Americans really like. And let's just talk about that for a second. Again, back to the metaphor of who biked here this morning. They had to check the weather report. They had to think, do I really want to ride in rain? What meetings do I have after work? Kind of have to fish through all these things. With bike share, it doesn't matter. Like if you let's say it's raining in the morning and you take the bus to work, and then it's sunny in the afternoon, which is pretty much our entire spring, is the weather's very, very ephemeral, kind of changes from moment to moment. Then you can grab that bike share bike to go home or go to a meeting or whatever. It's right there on the street. You don't have to think about it. It's just there. And you can use it if you need it. And if you don't want to use it, then you use your other modes. So who uses bike share? Another way to think about this question is kind of more eggheady and like what types of trips are bike share trips? So if you look at the data for the United States and also for Canada and Europe, commute trips and work-related trips are the two biggest sources of trips. Then you have kind of just like your errands or entertainment, and then kind of like pleasure riding is kind of like down at the bottom. So one of the great things about bike sharing is that most systems have pretty much taken all of their bike share data, because all the systems have either GPS or some way that kind of like records every single trip that is made. So you have these huge data sets that we can't wait to hand over to PSU just to dig into. This graph was done by a private citizen for the Capital Bike Share Program in DC and Arlington, pretty much looking at their trip data. This is by season. It looks very much like Portland's trip data, which is essentially that summer is about twice as much riding as we see in winter. But this just kind of breaks it down by how many trips are happening per hour during the day. And what you see is these very big spikes during the peak rush hours, which tells you that a lot of people are using this to get to work. And then you have this kind of like dip between 9 and 12, where most people, amazingly, stay at their desks and don't go away somewhere. And then, oh, it's time for lunch. Oh, maybe I'll go for bike share and have lunch. Maybe I'll go meet somebody. Maybe I'll go shopping and somewhere I couldn't reach if I didn't have bike share. And so we kind of stay up here. And this is what's kind of interesting to me, is that there's not much of a dip after that lunch break. And I think that's a lot of work errands and just people kind of getting off work early. And then we have this spike of people going home from work, and then a very, very gradual, kind of dip down to like 0 as people use this to meet friends, to go out to eat, do shoppings, do errands, or just kind of to move around. So when we first started talking about bike share, everyone would be like, oh, this will be great for tourists. That's what you always heard. Oh, this will be great for business travelers. This will be great for tourists. It'll be great for tourists. Well, tourists are an important revenue stream for bike share because they're day members. You remember how we talked about before, the first half hour of every trip is free. Then after that, there's kind of like a pretty exponential increase in how much it costs you. If you're on vacation, you're not really too worried about whether you're going to pay an extra $2 or $6 or $8. So people who use the system as day pass members, especially tourists, tend to like provide a nice revenue stream for folks. But most of these trips, this red is annual members, and this blue is day pass. And you can see most of these trips during the week are made by annual members. This is for DC. You see more, as you would imagine, on the weekend, a bigger mix of folks who are day pass users who could be either travelers or people who live or work in the area or are just giving the system a try. So what is next for Portland? 2 weeks ago, we announced Alta Bicycle Share as our finalists and our intent to negotiate with them. So our next big steps are negotiating the contract, station planning, where we're going to put these stations, and securing the sponsors. And those are kind of like, except for negotiating the contract, those will be happening concurrently. So I mentioned this before, but where are we going to put these stations? So as I mentioned, I encourage folks to think about bike share like public transit. And similar to public transit, especially high-capacity public transit and bike share both work best when you have a lot of intensity of use, or a lot of people at your place, whether that is people living somewhere, people working somewhere, people shopping somewhere, people using, or just people like transferring from transit. Those are places where we can really leverage the most origins or destinations, the most potential trips, and really maximize the potential for bike share. So in Portland, that pretty much looks like the central city. And that's likely what we'll shoot for phase 1, because it's very important to us to make it successful at the beginning. We would love to have stations way out on the outskirts of the city. But if there's no other station near you, that bike share station doesn't really do you a whole heck of a lot of good. So this is kind of like, you can pretty much think of this whole area down to South Waterfront over to kind of like the street. This is essentially the streetcar loop as it's completed, all the way up into Northwest Portland, West End, all that. So has anyone here gone into our crowdsourcing? Yeah, thank you very much. So we put out in the spring when we released the RFP a crowdsourcing map that allowed Portlanders to tell us where they want bike share stations, and then also they could click on any one of these and then say they liked it if they liked it. And then we have this nice, to kind of like bring back all those pleasant memories of junior high and high school, we have this filter by popularity bar. So that if you put a station on here, you can see how popular they are by moving this station. It will tell you how many votes you had by station. So we had over 1,000 stations recommended. We're probably not going to have more than 75 with our first phase. But this has still been very useful for us. And one of the things that it kind of told us is that the bike share IQ of Portlanders has really increased dramatically from when we did the bike share demonstration in 2009 to now. Because at our top stations, and this is in terms of votes, in terms of people saying they liked it, people really get how bike share works. And you can see that most of these stations, there's a couple outliers out here. We have one at Fubon, and everybody likes Fubon. So we had one out here and one out here in Holgate. But most of these are in the central city in areas that where bike share will really work for us. And so this information has been really helpful for us. So the stations themselves, one of the challenges that we face is that these stations are pretty darn big. These stations need to be, if we're going to put them on the sidewalk, we have what we call the furnishing zone, which is where the street trees go, where the parking meters go, where the signs go, where the benches go. Pretty much all the stuff that is on the sidewalk needs to go in this area. So that area is kind of cluttered. We need at least 40 interrupted feet to make this work. Thankfully, both of the bike share vendors, and now that we've chosen Alta Public Bike System, which creates the system, have some products where we can kind of go around tree stumps or whatnot to kind of move around things. But we need a lot of space. And Portland's got a pretty pedestrian-friendly downtown, which we all like, these 200-foot blocks that make it really kind of feel like a really nice place to be. But it means there's just not a lot of space. So we're really challenged with finding space on the sidewalks, and so we're looking at places to go. So we've also, and obviously for us, because a big source of revenue for us is the metered parking on the street. So that's kind of near and dear to our bottom line. And also to businesses in the central city really don't want to see us using a lot of that for bike share. So our approach to this is finding the best places for bike share. If we can't find a place on the sidewalk, partnering with neighborhoods and businesses in identifying these situations. Prioritize, as I said, these off-street locations where we can. There's some private plazas and some other places that we've looked at in other public areas. Focus first on our high-demand, low-conflict places where we make everybody happy. Obviously, that's kind of a no-brainer. And then where we have to, we look at meter parking. But that's something that's kind of very low on our priority. One of the things working in our benefit and kind of approaching the business community, we've held over 40 meetings with business groups and community organizations talking about bike share this spring. And one of the things we've really driven home about bike share is the nexus between bike share and your bottom line. So this is the study, the survey from Capital Bike Share in DC, Arlington. They asked if a business, restaurant, or shop is easily accessible to a bike share station, does that make you more likely to shop there? And what they found is a lot of people said, yeah, if I'm on my bike and I'm trying to figure out where to go to eat, where I'm going to shop, a bike share station makes me in proximity makes me much more likely to patronize that institution. So we've been trying to get this out there and let people know. What we've seen in other cities is when you bring bike share in, the business community is kind of like, ooh, I'm not sure about that. Sounds nice, but keep it away from my business. And then after they see the success of it, all of a sudden there's kind of a reversal of that, and they really want to see, they're asking for a station near you. So the challenges. So I've already talked about the space constraints. One of the big issues is obviously access to helmets. We're really lucky in Portland that we have a very high number of Portlanders who, when they bike, use a helmet. We do our Portland bike counts every year that are done by volunteers and PBOT staff. One of the things we look at is we track how many people are wearing helmets. We had, in the 2011 count, we had 80% of people using a helmet, which is fantastic. One of the wonderful things about bike share is you can walk up to a station without even having thought about it and jump on that bike and go. That probably means you don't have a helmet in your backpack or your purse or whatever. So one of the challenges is trying to get folks bike helmets. If you're a long-term member of bike share, you probably have a helmet at work or wherever you're at. So you kind of, if you're thinking about it, you just have that extra helmet that you put on. If you look at the survey data, about half of the people of long-term members are regularly or sometimes wearing a helmet for their trips. It's getting at these kind of like opportunistic trips that it's really challenging. And we're just going to go off of the best practices of other cities, partnering with bike shops, giving away a lot of helmets, and also partnering with our bike rental places and meeting with all of our bike rental places who obviously are a little bit concerned about bike share taking a bite out of their business. They're all very interested in providing helmet fitting, low-cost hamlet rentals, so really kind of trying to leverage our existing businesses. Reaching low-income Portlanders is very important to us, and it's frankly an area that bike share hasn't done a great job of reaching folks. If you look at the survey data, when they ask about, tell us about your income, tell us about your ethnicity, there's a lot of early adapters, and there's a lot of people well-educated and financially well-off who are using bike share. And reaching underserved populations has been a challenge. I'll talk a bit in a slide or two about kind of some of the case studies from other cities that we're going to learn from. And then the impact on bike rental businesses. As I mentioned, we've met with all the bike rental businesses and talked to them about ways that we can lower the impact on their bottom line. One of the things is that bike share works really well for a tourist if you just want to hop around, to do small trips. If you want to take a trip with your kids, if you want to kind of have a curated experience where somebody tells you where all the cool brew pubs are or all the cool coffee shops or where to go to really experience real Portland. If you want to do long distance riding, bike share is not a good fit for you. This is really kind of like a very simple service, and there's a lot of value-added services that our bike rental businesses provide and really are passionate about providing. The actual transactional thing of just renting out a bike is really not that exciting to them, although it's important in their bottom line. So we've talked with them and Travel Portland, our tourist organization for Portland Metro, about doing marketing to the tourist market and saying, this is biking in Portland. Here are the things, kind of a matrix that says, what do you want to do? And then helps people know which one they want to do. And Pedal Bike Tours, one of the bike share companies, wants a bike share station right in front of their front door because they think that actually that's going to be leverage for them. So as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about reaching diverse communities and some of the case studies that have happened other places. One of the things that bike share has done is really reduce theft problems that with first generation especially was a huge problem. Theft and vandalism rates in US bike share systems has been extraordinarily low. But there's this issue of, part of that is that there's a credit card tied to that usage of that bike share bike. And that was identified, obviously, as a barrier to very low-income folks who might not have a credit card. Bank on DC is a program with Capital Bike Share where they partnered with financial institutions and community service organizations that if you signed up for an account, you didn't need a minimum balance, and then they provided a discounted annual membership fee. My feeling is that $50 is not much of a discount if somebody's low income or very low income and they've actually seen very low levels of usage. Denver Bike Share got a grant from LiveWell, which is a kind of an initiative of Kaiser, to partner with affordable housing providers and actually provide essentially free memberships for people who lived in low-income housing developments that were near bike share stations. They've had 96 people take up on that, which is better than DC's done. Nice Ride Minnesota has 500 memberships that they set aside through a grant to provide for free to low-income folks. And they partner with nonprofits, and they hold a bike ride with that nonprofit and have clients or members of that community go on a bike ride on the bike share bikes, and then at the end of that ride, they can then get a free membership and get signed up right there. And they've redeemed 159 in the past year, so their numbers are looking good. And then Boston, through their, has something with their public health authority and kind of the whole idea of active transportation, getting people active. Started out with $15 memberships, dropped that to $5 memberships, and has had 360 people take them up on that. So what we've learned from that and kind of like talking to other cities is that the credit card debit barrier, which tended to be the first thing that everyone was kind of like would kind of pounce on, is really not that big of a barrier in the market research that folks have done. The thing about the half-hour ride with people within the communities that have been talked to seemed too short, and so a lot of these programs have actually extended for the low-income memberships have extended that free zone to an hour or an hour and a half. Obviously, the stations need to be where people are, and so that's been a challenge. We have, within the central city, some of our highest low-income census tracts in the city are in the central city, so we are partnering. Actually, we've already started talking with REACH and Central City concerning some of our community partners. So those community partnerships are very important. So that's it. I wanted to say that please visit our website for information. We just had 2 really wonderful studies published this year. The Mineta Institute, I believe, with a professor from UC Berkeley, Public Bike Sharing in North America, and the one that I kind of made fun of for their definition, Bike Sharing in the United States, which was done by the Pedestrian Bicycle Information Clearinghouse. So thanks very much. If anyone has questions, I'd be happy to hear them. Yes, right there.
So I'm hoping that we can take this back a little bit and talk about the policies behind this and the funding priorities and everything, because it's my understanding that this was funded in part through the regional flexible funds.
That's correct. It was completely
and so, you know, we have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of streets and sidewalks and crossings on major transit streets that need improvements. And so what is the basis for making this a priority over, you know, Barber Boulevard or other high crash corridors? Because I know that was a tricky subject when this was being approved. So,
yes, thank you. So all of the funds that we are putting forward this are through the regional federal funds. Those are federal transportation dollars earmarked for pedestrian and bike projects. We put forward a large number of projects to look at. Barber Boulevard was one of them that was not funded, though it has been funded since through other money. As I mentioned, the big things were we have some policy goals that we need to reach that are pretty aggressive in terms of increasing the number of people using a bicycle and reducing the number of people using a car. And because of just the potential of bike share was very, very great in increasing that, and so that was why that was one of the projects that was selected. We selected the majority of the money went to projects actually in East Portland, our Bikes in Transit project, which was connecting our bike network to transit, because in East Portland, the bike network is not as good, and things are further apart, and so people are making longer trips, and so we really focused on connections to transit. And then a project in Foster was another one of the projects. So there's a lot of priorities, and it's challenging to kind of get everything we need funded. And I think the gentleman here, then Chris, and then over here.
Hi, mine's kind of a multiple
Sure.
question. Your goal for 75 stations, what number of bikes is that going to be putting onto the streets?
Okay. Do you want to just give all your questions?
Well, yeah, and then the annual cost per bike or station a year to maintain and use, and what is that versus the loss of revenue to businesses with curb appeal and things like that?
Okay. Okay, so the 75 stations, that's a number that when we put together a proposal that we've kind of aspired to. Usually you can pretty much just add a zero to the number of stations, and that's the number of bikes. So it would be 750 bikes. Whenever you see a bike or station, it's usually kind of it's kind of like the metric system. And then your second question was about annual cost. And then I think for maintenance, and then maybe capital cost as well. So in terms of capital cost, if you kind of like look at the entire cost of a bike share system, all the hardware, the software, the R&D, kind of like that whole thing, and encapsulate that into a unit cost per bike, the cost is usually about $4,000 to $5,500 per bike. So it's not inexpensive in terms of an investment. If you look at the trips, the number of trips and the trip replacement cost versus other transit modes, it actually looks pretty good in terms of the actual per trip. It's a big bite for us in biking. We've been pretty stingy with how much money we spend on biking and our return. And then an operating cost in terms of the annual operating cost, again, using a per bike number is usually about $1,250 if you're using a nonprofit operator like Denver or Minneapolis, to up around $2,200, $2,300 if you're using a consultant. So those are kind of the range that you see it there. And then the study that this bike share study here kind of goes into a lot of that detail as well. And then in terms of, you also asked about lost revenue. I mean, our hope is that there's actually gained revenue. And I think that survey from DC kind of shows you that if you put where there's a nexus there, you can really kind of leverage that. And we're not into picking fights. So we've got, if we have businesses who don't want us there. We've talked a lot with the Portland Business Alliance, the Central East Side Industrial Council. I mean, we're not looking to pick any fights. So I think that where you're going to see stations is where we're actually going to see leverage as opposed to withdrawal of economic activity.
Thank you.
So in the map of the original 775, it looks like it's pretty close to where there's a lot of public transit already.
Yeah.
So have you thought about how that might decrease the use of public transit, and is TriMet okay with that?
Yeah, so I kind of thought we might get this question, but I didn't want to get too data nerdy. So this is this is kind of that data kind of broken out into all modes in terms of remember that question about think of your last bike share trip, what would you have taken if you hadn't taken that? So yeah, when you look at kind of where bike sharing kind of replaces trips or grabs trips, walking in transit, there is definitely a significant kind of grab from those two areas. So that's there. I would say that kind of whenever you're bringing a new alternative in, similar to car sharing, if you look at kind of Car2Go or any of them, that there are probably some new car trips created, but there's also car trips replaced by just making walking and biking and using transit more convenient. And that's kind of our end goal here. So TriMet we've talked to TriMet, we've met with TriMet a number of times on bike share, and there was recently a quote from Mary Fesh, who's their public spokesperson, who said, well, we're really if they can help us with reducing peak demand, that's great for us because we can't afford. That's when we need more buses and trains. We don't have that, and if you remember that slide, that's where you see the majority of your trips is in those peak areas. So we actually think that we can kind of leverage transit, help them with the peak hour demand when they're really crunched, and also make some trips that aren't the greatest transit trips into decent transit trips. And then if you're coming from Beaverton or Gresham, if anyone's ever tried to do that and bring your bike on max, I mean, it's a nightmare, and it can oftentimes be very challenging. Well, now that we have this wonderful high-security bike parking that TriMet has built at those stations, someone can actually bring their really nice bike from their home to that transit center, put that bike on there, get off transit downtown or where they are, and then use bike share for that last piece of that mile. So we really think there's definitely going to be a little bit of grab, but we think there's also kind of expanding the market.
So you mentioned Car2Go, and I want to pick up on that in a couple of dimensions. One is just that my perspective of trying to have people lead car-free lives or car-light lives, the richer the tapestry of choices we create, the easier that gets. And I've, just in my own life, my household has one car. It's not my car. It's my partner's car. She's very clear about that. Adding Car2Go to the tapestry here in the city, I was surprised at how it made some trips easier for me, either because the bus required a very inconvenient transfer that was going to take a long time, or just I missed the bus I wanted and it was 20 minutes to the next one and I didn't want to wait. So I think this will just add one more choice and make it that much easier. So I'm really enthusiastic about it. But the interesting thing about the Car2Go model, of course, is it is point-to-point and all the technology is in the vehicle, right? So you mentioned the stations are a hassle. We're going to deploy a Generation 3 system with stations, but do you see a Generation 4 somewhere along the line that is stationless and all the technology is on the bike?
Well, thanks, Chris, for kind of articulating a point that I was intending to try to articulate, but you did a much better job of it, and that is just what Car2Go has kind of really, I think, primed the market for bike share and that whole concept of one way and that idea of creating a better ability to have a low-car life. In terms of kind of eschewing stations and having everything on the bike, Social Bicycles is a startup out of New York City. They're doing, they have a small system they're doing now in Buffalo, the San Francisco International Airport, and I forget where else. So it's already out there. We actually had a number of conversations with them. They attended, and so yeah, I'm very hopeful that that will be kind of the end all, if not the entirety of a bike share system. At least some of your bike share system could be done, and that would really allow you to expand into areas where density is not as high, and would could really reduce your unit cost. I think that there might always be a need for a station because most of those systems use smartphone technology, though. Social Bicycles does have like a little point of sale that kind of looks like that little kind of like where you swab your debit card when you go to the grocery store to kind of do your purchase. Has that built right into the bike. I foresee that still having that something, a piece of the system, but I think it's a great idea. And then we can use, and what they do is they use the existing bike racks in the city as their stations, so you kind of have the lock right on the bike. And so, thank you. I'll let you decide.
has Bike Share Portland decided what would be their best way to try and reach the underserved population?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, let me just break that up. So the question was, how are we going to do it?
Yeah.
Well, we're certainly going to take all the case studies that have happened there, and we're trying already to kind of incorporate those and already building those relationships. And I kind of think I would break that into kind of two pieces. One is getting folks from underserved communities or just who are either low income or whatever barrier they're having access to the bike. So make them a bike share user if they want to use the system, and also let them know about it. So that's one piece. A lot of that is I think, through partnerships with community service organizations and folks who already have relationships with those populations, and so that we can kind of leverage that. And then the other piece is actually that we'll create jobs with this. I mean, this is public money, and this has been made very clear to us by the equity community. This is public money, and it should create public benefit. And that public benefit is both in direct transportation use and is also the jobs that are created with that. And so we've talked with Work Systems Inc. has a Green Career Pathways program, which is very exciting, which is pretty much a coalition of a lot of community service organizations and equity groups coming together to grab some job training money from the federal government that focuses on kind of green jobs. So it's really kind of tailor-made for us. So it's something that we're very actively exploring, and hope that we can see return on both sides. So that's kind of a.
Hi, I'm curious to know how the bike share is going to align with improvements in bicycle facilities in places where you're having bike share stations. If you, once you pick out the stations, are you going to try to either put in bike facilities or upgrade existing facilities? I rode the Capitol Bike Share in Washington, D.C., and a lot of the system was bike lanes and cycle tracks, and I don't know if I would have been as confident or as comfortable using it without that in place.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. It kind of gets at kind of a tension that we're dealing with. And one is that you want bike share where the demand's highest, and where you can be assured that that bike is going to be used the most, so you can generate the highest number of trips for that public investment that you're making in bike share. And that sometimes will intersect with our bikeway network, and sometimes it won't. So that's going to be kind of one of our balancing acts, is making sure that we just don't kind of look at our Portland bike map and start plopping stations just right on all of our facilities without thinking about the land uses and the demand, because that's really an important piece. We're hoping that a lot of those are going to overlap. With the rollout of bike share, we're actually doing some improvements to the central city, and are working on that right now, and kind of what those improvements are going to be. But likely we're looking at access to the bridgeheads, which are ironically not that great right now, and other signage and wayfinding, just to make it easier for people to get around the city. Because the wonderful thing about the central city, even though there's not a bike lane on every street, is that we have the signals timed at about 11 to 12 miles an hour. Don't quote me on that, but it's under 15 miles an hour. So if you're riding a bike, I'm sure some of you had this experience of actually riding too fast and kind of hitting the red light. So traffic's moving very slowly, so if we can make it comfortable enough for people to feel like they can take the lane, or just ride with traffic, then we're hoping that we won't necessarily need a facility on every street to make it a comfortable place for people to ride. Thank you.
I wanted to go back to the underserved communities, yes. and I read that study that Community Cycling Center released, and one of the major barriers is actually, of the underserved community, some of them don't have citizenship status, and they're very concerned about being pulled over, whether it's in a car, even walking, biking on their own bike, or potentially using a bike share. And so I'm wondering if that's one of their major barriers. How is it that we can? How is it that we think we can increase the usage if providing an opportunity? If really the barrier is not so much the form of transportation, but it's something other than the form of transportation.
Yeah, that's a toughie. I mean, if they don't feel comfortable riding a private bike, I mean that makes it more difficult if it's a system that's kind of identified with a government. I mean, that will be a challenge. I mean, I think that the big thing is kind of our outreach strategy is grounded in relationships with organizations that have established relationships, have established trust with the communities that we're trying to reach. So I would hope that kind of our partnership with those organizations would transfer some of that trust. Obviously, it's not going to be 100% transfer from the direct relationship. But if they see this as an outgrowth of their relationship with that organization, I'm hoping that will increase their comfort in using the system. But thank you for that very good point.
One question about the weather. Some people say, what are you going to do when it rains to keep the bikes dry and to make it more appealing?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it rains here. So every bike that is in the system, I didn't talk about this much, but as you can imagine, when somebody rents a bike, they all come in. I mean, as we saw in the peak hour, there's a lot of people going to work. We know we've got a lot of jobs in the central city. So people come in. Everybody comes in with bike share in the morning, and then they go out in the evening. And if you live down here, if there's a hill and there's a bike share station at the top and at the bottom, everybody brings their bike down here. Not many people want to ride that bike back up there. So what you have when you have the bike share operators rebalancing the system pretty much about 18 hours a day, that they're out there actually moving bikes around in order to make sure that the system is balanced, so that when you bring that bike to a station, you have a decent chance that there's going to be an open spot for that bike to be. And when you come out and you want a bike, there's actually a bike there and they're not all gone. So in the process of doing that, the operator who's ever rebalancing is going to be just doing a quick wipe on those seats to make sure the seats are dry. There will be, there's certainly, DC gets as much rain as we get, but our rain obviously tends to happen kind of like this. We have like a 10-month drizzle. So it's a little bit different than DC, where it's kind of like more punctuated. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I think it's going to be fine. The vendors all had very high confidence when we asked them about this.
I think the question online was that they're going to have roofs.
Are they going to have roofs? No, they will not have roofs. What I did mention is that the system is solar powered. So they will be out. They'll be exposed 24/7, 365 days a year. These will be out on the street. Obviously, they'll be taken out for maintenance. But yeah, they'll be exposed. But they're built tough, and that's why this is not the bike that you're going to want to ride to St. John's, because it's made to withstand a lot of urban use. I guess that'd be a euphemistic way of putting it.
And I may have missed part of what you were talking about in the presentation, but are there plans for expansion beyond sort of that streetcar area that you sort of designated there?
Well, I mean, certainly in my heart there are. But yes, I mean, we really need to kind of see how we do with phase one before we can kind of, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, as another person talked about, we have a backlog of need in the city of Portland. And we certainly have a lot of projects that are kind of like queued up that are in need. So certainly I mean, if you look at nationwide, like all the large systems have all grown in the second year, mostly through just the public, really calling for larger systems. So the more money, the more the system can be, that the cost of the system can be borne by private sponsors, the easier it will be for us to expand. So it's certainly, I mean, we'd love to be into this kind of our streetcar suburbs, kind of like our close-in neighborhoods. So that's definitely kind of like where our eye is for phase two, if that were to happen.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could speak to the access to helmets being a challenge, and if you meant that there's going to be a requirement for a helmet.
Thank you for, yeah. There's not going to be, we don't require helmet use in the city of Portland, and we're not going to require it for bike share. We're certainly going to encourage people to use bikes. We haven't entered a negotiation yet with Alta, so I can't say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but there's programs that Alta has done in other cities that in providing very low-cost helmets to people, partnerships with bike shops. So certainly we're going to try to get helmets into people's hands when they join bike share, and provide access through partnerships with the bike rental companies and bike shops for these for the day users who are unlikely to kind of have a bike helmet with them, but no, it will not be required. All right, thank you.